This is the last moment of Jeff Baena, a man who rarely stepped into the spotlight, but who rewrote the lives of others through scenes filled with irony, discomfort, and quiet sorrow. On an early morning, while the city of Los Angeles slowly woke up, he sent a final message. Calm, short, no punctuation. That silence turned out to be permanent. Jeff Baena, the director known for his offbeat view of love, death, and everything in between, would not speak again that day. His name didn't make global headlines. His passing didn't shake the entertainment world. But in that quiet goodbye, there was a truth many would rather ignore. Even those who make others laugh sometimes can no longer cry. He wasn't a celebrity darling. No Oscars. No red carpet fame. No viral soundbites. And yet, his films found their way to people who never quite felt at home in the world. His characters were broken, dreaming, awkward in their grief just like him. What exactly happened in those final months remains unclear. There was no public scandal. No dramatic fallout. Only a growing silence. A marriage that faded quietly in the background. And according to friends, a look in his eyes that seemed to drift further inward with each passing week. But beneath it all, there was a pattern he understood better than most. It's easier to make sense of someone else's chaos than to face your own. The man who helped Aubrey Plaza shine on screen. Who invited Alison Brie to put unspeakable emotions into words. Who turned medieval tales of witches into tragic comedies. That man never finished writing his own final scene. Until that morning. A pale strip of sunlight slipped across the edges of a house in Los Feliz. Inside, a single lamp still glowed above a pile of old scripts. And on a phone screen, still open on the nightstand, a message blinked unread. It was the kind of ending Jeff might have written himself. Slow, beautiful in its ache, and tragically true. Before the final text was sent, before the quiet house on the hill was sealed in silence, Jeff Baena was building something few people truly understood. He was never part of Hollywood's inner circle, but quietly, steadily, he carved out his place in the indie world, not by chasing awards, but by building stories that whispered instead of shouted. Born in Miami, raised on art films and philosophy, Jeff studied at Nias Tisch School of the Arts, an eye for subtle tension, a mind trained in abstraction. His career began not with a blockbuster, but with something broken, a car accident that left him recovering at home for months. It was during that recovery that he started writing, and from there, everything shifted. Baena co-wrote I Heart Huckabees with David O. Russell, a film that blurred the lines between existential dread and quirky absurdism. But his own voice, as a director, would emerge later, and it was unmistakably personal. Life After Beth, Joshie, The Little Hours, Horse Girl, Spin Me Round, all different on the surface, but each one, in its own strange rhythm, explored the same ache. What happens when people feel misplaced in their own lives? Baena's characters were often in denial, sleepwalking, pretending they were fine until the truth found them. And the truth always came quietly. It's no coincidence that Jeff Baena fell in love with actors who could wear sadness like a second skin. Aubrey Plaza, his partner for over a decade, became not only his muse, but his co-conspirator. Together, they blurred the lines between performance and personal truth. Their home became a sanctuary for other misfits. Game nights with friends. Screenwriting sessions that turned into therapy. Ideas born out of laughter, then twisted into darkness. But while his films explored breakdowns, obsession, grief, Baena himself avoided drama in real life. He kept interviews brief. He rarely attended festivals, even on red carpets. He stood a few steps behind Aubrey. He wasn't trying to disappear. He was trying to protect something fragile. Because beneath the scripts and the dry wit, there was always a weight he carried alone. In the fall of 2024, the friends noticed a shift. The marriage began to drift. No public announcement. No divorce papers. Just space widening. Baena began therapy again. His work stalled. And that spark, the one people loved about him, dimmed. Still, he never made it about himself. He asked how everyone else was doing. He listened. He smiled. And he went home alone. By December, Aubrey Plaza had quietly moved out. The holidays passed without pictures. Baena stayed in Los Feliz, surrounded by books, old cameras, and half-finished scenes. He was still planning to write, still hoping maybe to fix the story. But the thing about silence is this. You can only hold it for so long before it swallows you. And when it does, all that remains is the question no one dares to ask out loud. In the early days, Jeff Baena never planned to direct. He loved story. He loved character. But he hated noise. Hated being watched. When he worked, he sat in silence. Eyes narrowed. Fingers still thinking not of fame, but of fracture. He understood those stories better than most. And he told them as if he was translating something only he could see. But somewhere along the way, the stories began to echo too loudly. It started subtly: a canceled dinner, a missed call. Nothing dramatic, just space. Aubrey noticed it first. She was the only one who truly could. They'd been partners for years, writing, filming, living side by side. But by mid-2024, even that bond began to blur. Friends whispered that they were growing apart. But that doesn't explain the look in his eyes at their last screening. He wasn't tired. He looked absent. When Spin Me Round premiered, Jeff stood in the back of the room. He didn't mingle. He didn't smile for photos. He watched the audience watch something he barely remembered making. Later that night, he told a friend, "It's strange how you can build something funny from something that almost killed you." No one asked what he meant. In September, the shift became real. Aubrey moved out quietly. Temporarily, she said, but Jeff didn't fight it. He retreated. He stopped writing, stopped calling, stopped asking how others were tired. He still showed up to game nights, poured wine, laughed at the right beats. But when the night ended and the door shut, the silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt heavy. By October, he was in therapy. Again, he told someone he felt foggy, that nothing he wrote made sense anymore. November was worse. He barely replied to texts. Let the yard grow wild. Still, people thought he was recharging, waiting for inspiration. But he wasn't. He was slipping. In December, he told Aubrey not to worry. He told her she should focus on her work. And she believed him, because she wanted to. On January 2nd, they spoke for nearly an hour. She would later say he sounded calm, almost hopeful. Before they hung up, he said, maybe he'll write again. That was the last time they spoke. On the morning of January 3rd, at 7:36 a.m., Jeff sent one final message. Don't forget the camera charger. It's in the top drawer. That drawer still held the charger A few hours later, a neighbor walking, their dog saw the front door slightly open. Lights were still on. Music still playing. What they found inside would never be fully explained. There was no foul play. No note. No recording. Just silence. The city moved on. The media barely blinked. A few headlines noted, "Indie filmmaker Jeff Baena dies at 47. But for those who truly knew him, it wasn't just the loss of a man, it was the loss of a story never told. Jeff had notes for 3 unfinished scripts, a journal filled with scribbled dreams, a folder on his desk labeled, "The Things I Haven't Said." Well, never know what was inside. And maybe that's how he wanted it. No twist. No final monologue. Just a charger in a drawer. And the unbearable weight of a message no one ever answered. In the weeks that followed Jeff Baena's death, silence hung heavier than grief. There were no dramatic headlines. No viral tributes. Just quiet confusion. Some friends reached out to Aubrey. Gently. Cautiously. Not knowing what to say. Others didn't reach out at all, unsure if the loss was public enough to mourn or too private to touch. Jeff had always been the quiet one. The observer. The man in the corner who listened more than he spoke. But now, the quiet became unbearable. And suddenly, little things started resurfacing. Stories that once felt like throwaway moments began to sting. Like how Jeff had given away his favorite film books in December. Telling a friend, they'll mean more to someone else now. Or how he had started walking the neighborhood late at night alone, without a phone, even when it rained. Or how he had written to a former professor just weeks before, asking, "Do you think people are born tired? Or do we become that way?" No one connected the dots. Or maybe they did too late. One friend, who worked with him on the little hours, confessed they hadn't heard from him in months, and had simply assumed he was off writing something brilliant. But the brilliance had dimmed. What few people saw was that Jeff Baena, the man who made brokenness feel poetic, had slowly stopped believing in his own metaphors. He no longer wanted to turn pain into comedy. He no longer saw the point. For years, he had hidden behind wit, the kind that made people laugh in uncomfortable silence. But underneath that dry humor was a man unraveling. Someone once said Jeff was like a camera lens turned inward, capturing everything, but never appearing in the frame. And maybe that's what killed him. Not a moment of despair, but the weight of years spent watching instead of reaching. The media offered only facts. Director Jeff Baena found dead in Los Angeles home. No foul play suspected. Private memorial service pending. But the truth, the real truth, was in the gaps between those words. In the photos Aubrey never posted. In the voicemail Jeff left for a producer but never sent. In the script he titled, "The One Who Disappeared." He never finished it. And no one else could. At the Golden Globes, Aubrey appeared onstage calm, collected, composed. She didn't mention Jeff by name, but she looked into the camera, paused longer than expected, and said, "We tell stories to survive. Sometimes we forget to save ourselves." That was all. The room applauded, not knowing what they were clapping for. Behind the scenes, Aubrey broke down. She had sold the Los Feliz house quietly in August, removing every trace of their shared life before the press noticed. She never spoke publicly again about that morning, or about the charger in the drawer, or about the last message. But friends close to her said she would sometimes sit alone with Jeff's old film camera, the one he never let anyone else touch, and stare through the viewfinder, without clicking the shutter, as if waiting for one more frame, one more breath, one more word. Other friends began sharing memories, not in interviews, but in whispers, about how Jeff once confessed that he often felt like a secondary character in his own life, about how he refused to watch his own films because they reminded him of what he didn't say, about how he always apologized when people complimented his work, as if he didn't deserve it, and about the folder, the one labeled Things I Haven't Said. It was real. Aubrey found it after he passed. She never shared its contents, only said that it was both devastating and beautiful, and that she was keeping it for him, for herself, for no one else. The world may never know what was written inside, but we know it wasn't. There was no letter, no explanation, no answer. Just the echo of a man who spent his life writing endings for other people and left his own unfinished. And maybe that is the darkest truth of all, that some stories aren't meant to be completed, only felt, only remembered, only mourned in silence. Here's something haunting about the way Jeff Baena lived and left that forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. Not just about him, but about the world we've built around creativity, silence, and emotional survival. Jeff was never the loudest person in the room. He didn't crave approval. I didn't chase spotlights. But maybe, in a world that rewards noise, that very quietness made him invisible. We often celebrate artists only after they're gone, after the shock, after the hashtags, after the eulogies are drafted. But Jeff didn't leave behind a legacy designed for applause. He left behind something far more delicate, a body of work that whispered, that unsettled, who that made you smile and then question why you were smiling. His films weren't perfect. They were messy, sometimes uncomfortable, often misunderstood. But that was the point. They were about people trying to make sense of themselves while pretending to have it all together. Just like Jeff, he once said in an interview that comedy is a way to tell the truth without making people flinch. But truth, as we've now seen, sometimes flinches back. What's most tragic is not simply that he died. It's that we didn't notice how deeply he was hurting, how much he had withdrawn, that behind every strange, offbeat character was a man trying to say something he never quite could. Maybe the greatest myth about artists is that their work will save them, that by creating, they are healing. But what if creating is just a way to delay the fall? What if it's a way to mask the collapse? We don't know what would have happened if Jeff had been louder, if he had reached out, if someone had seen the signs. But we do know that silence, however noble or artistic, is never the same as peace. And that's why this story matters. Not because it ends with grief, but because it reminds us what to look for in others. And in ourselves, in the comments, we invite you to share your thoughts. What do you see when you look at Jeff's films now? What did his stories mean to you, and what do they mean knowing what we know today? Did you ever feel like you understood him, or feel, maybe, that he understood you? These are not just questions for the sake of content. If they're the questions he asked quietly, consistently in every scene he ever wrote, and now we ask them for him, with honesty, with gratitude, and with the hope that maybe someone watching, somewhere, won't wait until it's too late to speak. There are stories that drift quietly through the world, unnoticed like wind through trees, like light across an empty room. Jeff Baena's was one of them. He never demanded attention, never asked to be remembered. And yet, he left behind something that lingers, a feeling, a frequency, a voice that didn't echo loudly, but never really faded either. If you've ever felt like you were outside the frame, like you were watching your own life from a distance, then maybe, without knowing it, Jeff was telling your story too. His characters weren't heroes. They didn't win. They didn't always heal. But they kept going, even when the world didn't make sense. Just like him. And now, his absence feels like one of his scripts, unresolved, open-ended, gently surreal. Well, never know what he meant to write next. Well, never hear his own version of goodbye. But maybe that's okay, because in the quiet corners of his films, in the glances, the pauses, the awkward silences, something was already being said. Something real, something true, and now, you know it too. Not the headlines, not the log lines, but the silence between the scenes, the things he never said but always felt. The world didn't stop when Jeff left it. No tributes lit up Times Square. No trending hashtags. Broke the internet. But in the soft rhythm of his stories, in the lives he briefly touched, something shifted. And maybe that's the legacy that matters most. Not what he made, but how he made people feel. So tonight, or someday soon, when the world feels too sharp, too loud, too fast, put on one of his films. Let the quiet in. Let the stillness breathe. And remember, there are stories that were never told, but now, one of them, and it's yours to carry in silence or in memory. Like a final message left in a drawer waiting to be found.